Got to throw in his 2 cents. I want to talk about in particular the sanctity of human life. It's a very, very precious thing. I promised BR I wouldn't get excited, so I'm going to hold on to this pulpit real tight. In Genesis chapter 9, verse 6, the Lord said, "Whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed." Now, when we think about the word man there, we don't want to think about male. The word man oftentimes in the scriptures isn't referring to the male. It's referring to mankind. It's a generic term referring to mankind, and this may be the way the word is used most often. I'm not sure. I really haven't checked that. But I do know that it's used that way a great deal. When you're talking about man, you're talking about men, women, children. You're talking about the entire human family or all humankind. Now, the law is, if you shed, parenthetically, an innocent person's life, because there is a law where you can shed the life of the guilty. So when you shed an innocent person's life, man is to take the life of that person. Okay? It's a life for a life, is what it basically boils down to. Well, why? Why did the Lord make that rule? Well, it's because man is made in the image of God. Man is different, unique, and very, very special. Okay? We're unlike anything else. We're the closest thing to God that exists. And our value, our significance, our importance is so great that whenever one person sheds the blood of another innocent, the life of that person is required now. A life for a life. People fuss about capital punishment all the time. No, capital punishment is the law of God. He is the ultimate capital punisher. Remember Sodom and Gomorrah? Remember the flood? Know what's going to happen at the end of time? He is the ultimate punisher. And he requires the life of the person who sheds innocent blood. Our founding fathers, they were in full agreement with this in both the Declaration of Independence as well as our Constitution. They alluded to the preciousness of life again and again. In the beginning of the second paragraph, it says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident." Self-evident. Common sense teaches us as much. The evidence is in. That all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. All men, all people, men, women, children, they're using the term in the same way. All men are endowed, gifted by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Today I want to talk about the right to life. Okay? It's a life that's guaranteed by the Constitution of the United States. It's a right that's guaranteed by most all of our government documents. The sanctity of human life has always been of great value and of great importance. This is why wars have been fought, to protect human life. Not necessarily to conquer another people's, but to protect your own peoples from a conquering people. All people are entitled to life, except for the unborn 12-week-old. They call it a fetus. You know why they call it a fetus, don't you? They don't want to call it a baby. Now listen to mama. "Oh boy, my baby's getting it." You ever see a mother say, "Oh boy, my fetus is moving"? I've never heard a mother refer to her unborn as a fetus. She always talks about my baby, my baby, my baby. But when you want to murder them, you can't call them a baby. We'll call them a fetus. Because nobody knows what a fetus is anyway. There's the right to kill that little person right there. And they're killed every day. There's a right to kill the 20-week newborn. This child was born at 20 weeks. It's alive. Its parents are fighting and spending a great deal of money trying to keep this baby alive. And not far from the hospital, probably somebody else killing theirs. You know, it's amazing to me how much this 20-week-old fetus looks like a human baby. Don't you think so? As a matter of fact, even the 12-week. You know, I'm not a Solomon, but I can tell that's a person. Or as the little boy said, that's a people. I know that. It's obvious. It's not a pig. It's not a dinosaur. It's not a worm. It's not a fish. I can tell that's a baby, and so can you. And they're slaughtered all the time. They all have the right to life except for this 28-week newborn. Again, the parents fight for the life of the child, and others just, theirs wind up in the dumpster. I could have brought pictures of that, but I didn't think that I should. But if you go on the internet, you can see the dumpsters that are full of little baby parts where they go in and tear their bodies up, cut their bodies up, and discard them in a dumpster. Big garbage truck will come along eventually, pick it up, throw it in the back of the truck, and take it off to the dump. And they usually bury them because the sight is just too grotesque. That happens about 1.5 million times a year that we know of. Becoming very prevalent once again is back alley abortions because they're a whole lot cheaper than a sanitary abortion. Is that an oxymoron or what? All except a 35-week newborn. This baby was born 3 weeks early. Looks like a baby, doesn't it? Kind of cute for a fetus, isn't it? But, you know, by law, they could have killed this child if they chose to. Sometimes they practice what they call partial birth abortion. Partial birth. Partially born. And then they start killing them. They cut them up, throw them in their little tray, and they get rid of them. I've watched partial birth abortions. I've seen it. I've seen other kinds of abortions. You can too. I'm not going to show you that here. All you got to do is go online. It's all over the place. They're not fake. It's the real deal. And it's not about the life of the mother. About 1,100 cases a year where abortions are performed because the life of the mother is in jeopardy. I've never heard a person complain about that. But there's a lot of difference between 1.5 million and 1,100. 1.5 million that we know of. There's probably a lot more than that. You realize that the United States of America has murdered more people than Joseph Stalin and Adolf Hitler put together. Do you find that amazing? It's very sad. It's very sad. Back in 1973, I made my living in beer joints, playing music. I didn't know anything about God. I just living for the good time, and I was having a good time. And I remember when Roe versus Wade came to a conclusion, and there was the right then to kill unborn babies. Now, most people say, oh, he's sorry as they come. I wouldn't have argued with that. I knew that was wrong. I may have been sorry, but I knew that wasn't right. It's not right to kill babies. You can call them fetus if you want to. We all know it's still a baby. It makes me think sometimes of the Holocaust in Germany. I worked with a woman from Germany one time. She said it didn't happen. There was no Holocaust. You know what most German peoples did? They turned their head. There were churches along the route that the trains took. And when the trains were coming through, and they knew they were coming through, they would get together in their church buildings, and they would sing at the top of their voices so they wouldn't hear the screams of the Jews going by in the cattle cars. And it wasn't just Jews. 6 million Jews were murdered in concentration camps. But there was more than 15 to 20 million people that died in those concentration camps. In addition to the Jews, there were the Soviets, there were the Gypsies, there were Christian peoples. They were all carried off to the concentration camps. And in the concentration camps, they perished. And the people did everything they could not to recognize what was going on. They knew it. Everybody knew it. But they wouldn't do anything about it. Didn't lift a finger. When the Russian and American forces freed men from these concentration camps, they made the people of the nearby town, they made them go into those concentration camps, into their barracks, and carry out the dead. They made them dig the graves. They made sure that they knew what happened in their backyard. They felt like they were exonerated because they turned a blind eye. I think that's what goes on in our country. We know what's going on, but we act like it's not happening. Or we act like it's not a big deal. Oh, they're better off dead than alive anyway. Really? I think you're on the wrong side of the fence of God when you take an attitude or position like that. There's a 1-week-old child. They've got bills in various senates around the country. It's called post-birth abortion. After birth abortion. This child's 1 week old. If that becomes law, they have the right to kill this baby. I guess they'll still call it a fetus. There are some scientists who say that a child doesn't become human until they have self-awareness. And there's different ages according to the experts. Some say self-awareness comes at 3 months. Some say it doesn't come till they're 2 years old. My little grandbuddy, he's 2 years old today. He made it past the deadline. It's no longer legal to kill the little fella if those bills pass. And they will. Maybe not today, but they will. And the blood is on our hands. And it breaks my heart. It's unbelievable to me that that can happen. Down syndrome. I seen a guy. He was before Congress, and back in 2017, they were showing the clip last week of his plea to Congress. These people don't deserve to live because they have no quality of life. Well, this young man, along with hundreds of others I wasn't even aware of, he was a millionaire. He's actually a self-made millionaire. He travels all around the world. He makes speeches of why people with Down syndrome have a good life. He was talking about, his good livelihood. He was talking about having seen things all over the world and enjoying himself as he traveled. He was talking about what a wonderful, wonderful family he had and all the love they shared back and forth. And yet in Congress they debate whether or not these people have quality of life. See, that's another way of defining human life. There has to be a quality of life before you can call it life. And if people are not experiencing quality of life, they're not human anymore. And you can eliminate them if you choose to. You know, our country was the first country that started all this experimentation in eugenics. No, it wasn't Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler learned it from the American Eugenics Society in New York City. That's where he found out about this stuff. It was being done in our country back during the 1800s. As a matter of fact, back then they sterilized 6,000 mentally retarded people because they couldn't produce anything that was worthwhile. Oh, the gears were going back then, and they've been running like crazy ever since. It's very sad. They get us to the television. Do you ever pay attention to television programs? I watched Hawaii Five-0. Well, it came out Friday night, but I watched it Saturday. And it was about a guy who helped homosexuals who were feeling pressure from their families. He was helping them to get along. Well, somebody killed him. And of course, the parents of this one girl he was trying to help, they were Christians, and they were nuts, and they were talking about how evil she was. They were going to deprogram her and yada, yada, yada. I mean, everything but the horns were sticking out of their heads. And you're sitting there watching on TV and you think, them Christians are nuts. There's something wrong with them people. But the stars of the show, the heroes, the guys that wear the white hat, like McGarrett and all his little buddies, oh, they're all against that kind of stuff. It's bad, it's bad. People who don't like gays, they don't like blacks. And one of the cops is black. He beat his fist. He's so angry because this stuff goes on in this country, racism, bigotry, and it just fires him up. Here's all these good guys. They abhor what they're seeing. And here we are watching that silly television set, and we think, them Christians are nuts. And there's nothing wrong with those gays. There's nothing wrong with all this other stuff. And they get into our heads. That's the way Heinrich Himmler did it in Nazi Germany. He did it by means of the radio because they didn't have televisions. But he did the same thing by means of the radio. And the culture changed, even to the point that the people consented to the death of innocent Jews. Beware what you watch. Pay attention to what they're telling you, because you might get your brain warped during the process. You might start thinking that because this child will never enjoy quality of life, they'd be better off to be executed. And we sure don't want to go there. All people have the right to life, but you know, our Constitution's been trampled on for a long time. There's a lot of folks, even in our government, they don't care nothing about the Constitution. Constitution says go right, they go left. They don't care. It just doesn't matter. We got a lot of people in our government that ain't got a lick of sense. There's a lot of people that are not American or American-oriented. They push for this socialist agenda. like the Germans did. And it's not good. Ralph Northam, he's a Democratic governor of Virginia. He was all over the television last week because of some of the nutty things he said. One of the things he said, legislators, most of whom are men, wink, wink, nod, nod. Men should not be allowed to have anything to do with women. Legislators, most of whom are men, should not be making decisions about women's choices about their reproductive health. Ralph, we're not talking about that. We're talking about human life. You know what he's saying? It's up to a woman to decide what she's going to do with her body. Fine, you want to kill yourself? Go ahead and kill yourself. But she's not out to hurt herself. She's out to hurt her child. And her child is not herself. You know, the baby within the mother might not even have the same blood type. That child within the womb is not a part of the mother. That child feeds off the mother just like mother feeds off God's green earth. And that doesn't give her the right to execute her child. But Ralph, he's like most of these good spineless men that exist in our society today. They'll do anything they have to do because they're terrified of women. And women are something to be terrified of because they can chew you up and spit you out. If you don't think so, look at Nancy Pelosi. Look at Hillary Clinton. I wouldn't want to draw swords with either one of those people because they're a lot smarter than me when it comes to political savvy. But I wouldn't run from them either, like so many are wont to do. He says it's not up to lawmakers to decide life and death issues. It's up to women to decide what to do with the child of God that they're carrying. He said he's going to sponsor a bill allowing post-birth abortion. That's what I was talking about just a moment ago. This is after-birth abortion. This child, this 1-year-old child, according to Ralph's bill, the mother would be permitted to kill it. Look at that pretty little thing. How can anybody kill that? But if his bill passes through the state Senate, it becomes law. And he says it's going to pass. I think he's wrong. People in Virginia stood up on their hind legs and they barked at Ralph last week because he's obviously gone over the top. Andrew Cuomo. Woo! Andrew Cuomo. Woo! What are you going to say about Andrew Cuomo? He's the governor of New York. Cuomo said if you're pro-life, you're not even welcome here in the state of New York. You don't have to worry, Cuomo. You're not going to get any of my money. If you're pro-life, you're not welcome in our state. He went on to say that he's going to, his bill, that he passed last week, it's on TV signing, that particular bill allows non-medical people to perform abortions. Non-medical people. Reckon why they did that. Reckon why they're going to allow non-medical people to perform abortions on children who have been born. I wonder, well actually Chris wondered, and he got me to wondering, I wonder if it's because they know they're not going to find enough doctors to do it. You know what that means, don't you? You remember back in 1973, one of the reasons they wanted to pass this Roe versus Wade thing? Remember, it was back alley abortions. Remember? Those of us that were living back in, it's back alley abortions. Too many women dying in the back streets because non-medical personnel were performing abortions. Remember that? I remember it good. Well, isn't that what this is? Isn't this a return to back alley abortion? That's what they ran from back in 1973. And now they're wanting to go back to it. I got a feeling Chris was right. Maybe they haven't got enough doctors because the doctors don't want anything to do with this mess. It's just too much over the top for their stomach. Kamala Harris, she's a Democrat senator from California. She wants to be our president in 2021. Go Kamala. She irritates me. She said, anyone pushing back on the 20-week abortion bill is committing an immoral act. You know, here's a woman that knows nothing about morality. And yet she talks about it when it serves her purposes. Anyone who wants to fight for the right of this child is committing an immoral act. How about that? If I believe that this child has the right to life, and I vote for those things, I give money for those things, and I argue for those things, I'm committing an immoral act in doing so. Frankly, I think murdering this baby is an immoral act. I'm kind of on the opposite side of the fence of Kamala. Remember her during the Supreme Court Judiciary Committee? And she wants to be our president. Better watch. Countries would legalize third trimester abortions after 20 weeks. You know, in this whole great big world, there's only 7 countries that permit such a thing to take place. You know what they are? These are the countries that we're in league with. We're on a par with these nations. Great Britain doesn't allow it. Europe doesn't allow it. France doesn't allow it. Spain doesn't allow it. India doesn't allow it. The Middle East states don't allow it. Russia won't allow it. We do. Or we shall. Shortly. We're keeping bad company these days. Oh, there's one other country, Canada, but you know, Canada goes whichever way the wind blows. I can say that. I'm half Canadian. Okay, they never stand for anything, and they seem to fall for everything. God gave all people the right of life. In the 127th Psalm, verse 3, children are a heritage from the Lord. The fruit of the womb is a reward. A day of reckoning is coming. Make no mistake about it. You can't shed that much innocent blood and survive. God will not let that happen. He's holy. He's just. He's consistent. And history is a great, great teacher. Like the United States, the Jews were also murdering their babies. And Jehovah said, because they have forsaken me and made this an alien place, because they have burned incense in it to other gods, whom neither they, their fathers, nor the kings of Judah have known, because they have filled this place with the blood of innocent children. They have also built the high places of Baal. Why? To burn their sons with fire. Murder for burnt offerings to Baal, which I did not command or speak, nor did it come into my mind. Therefore, because they're shedding innocent blood, the days are coming, says Jehovah, that this place shall no more be called Tophet or the valley of the son of Hinnom. It shall be called the valley of slaughter. There's a great day coming. I will make void the counsel of Judah and Jerusalem in this place. I will cause them to fall by the sword before their enemies, by the hands of those who seek their lives. Their corpses I will give as a meat for the birds of the heaven, for the beasts of the earth. I will make this city desolate and a hissing. Everyone who passes by will be astonished and hiss because of all of its plagues. He goes on and says much, much more, but I didn't put it in there because it really gets graphic. But people will go by Jerusalem and say, my, what a glorious nation. And look what it's come to, absolute ruin. Why? They had blood dripping down their elbows. They were up to their eyeballs in blood. They were killing their children. And God was watching. And he got angry because it's one of the most heinous crimes that people made in his image can be guilty of. Killing babies is a crime against common decency, humanity, and God. Come on, honey, it's killing babies is the immoral act, not fighting for their lives. In Exodus 21, 22 through 5, here's the law about abortion. When men strive together and hit a pregnant woman, now, yes, it exists today, it's a moral law. Okay? It's a moral law. It's eternal law. When men strive together and hit a pregnant woman so that her children come out, but there is no harm, there is no death. She's pregnant, men do what they do, and because they did what they did, the baby is prematurely born, and if that child does not die, the one who hit her shall surely be fined, as the woman's husband shall impose on him, and he shall pay as the judges determine. But if there is harm, if that unborn child dies, then you shall pay life for life. The life of the person who caused the premature birth is required because he brought on the death of an unborn child. That was the law of Moses and Israel. And it's a moral law. And it's God's attitude today as well. Life begins at conception. This is one thing people get into a whole lot. Well, life doesn't really begin until the blood starts flowing. Okay? Life doesn't really begin until 3 months in the womb. Life doesn't really begin until 6 months. Life doesn't really begin until a child is born. They take that breath of life. All kinds of things people say about when life begins. Fact of the matter is, nobody can know. Nobody can know. Nobody can know. There is no magnifying glass. There is no medical equipment. There is absolutely no way that man can determine when life begins. It's impossible. And the reason is because life begins when the spirit enters the body. Life ends when the spirit exits the body. It's that simple. And that's something that we can't determine. Of course, death can be determined because the heart starts beating, everything stops functioning. We know a person is passed on, but as far as life beginning, that's something we have no knowledge of, apart from divine revelation. If God tells us when life begins, then we can know when life begins. And you know what I'm going to say. God told us when life begins. God said, I will certainly return to you. In Genesis 18:10, he's talking to Abraham. I will certainly return to you, Abraham, according to the time of life. And behold, Sarah your wife shall have a son. And the Lord visited Sarah as he had spoken. I think this is about a year later in Genesis 21 when the Lord came back. The Lord visited Sarah as he had spoken. And the Lord did for Sarah as he had spoken. For Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, at the set time of which God had spoken to him. The set time. There was a time that God set in which he would come back. In verse 1 of chapter 21, the Lord visited Sarah at the set time. And at the set time, the Lord did for Sarah as he had spoken, as he had promised. And what was that God had spoken? Sarah conceived. It doesn't take a Solomon to understand it, does it? It's pretty simple, really, when you look at it. Sarah conceived at the set time. The set time is called the time of life. I will come back according to the time of life. And at the set time and the time of life are the same thing. The set time is the time of life. What happened when life began? Sarah conceived. Life began when Sarah conceived. That morning, that evening, that night, when she conceived, life came into existence. Because it's more than flesh and blood, we can't know apart from divine revelation. None of us can. People say they can, but they can't. The only way you could tell is if you can somehow see or weigh the spirit within a body. Then you could tell. But we can't do that. Because it's more than flesh and blood, we depend on what God says. In Zechariah chapter 12, verse 1, thus says Jehovah, Jehovah who forms the spirit of man within him. The spirit of man that Jehovah forms within the body is referred to as that part of us that's made in the image of God. When a person conceives, God forms a spirit and somehow fuses it in the body so that the two act in harmony with one another. I don't understand that stuff. Way over my pay grade. I only know what God said, and I know God only tells the truth. And I'm satisfied with him. Well, the spirit of man is placed within the body of the child at conception, which is called the time of life, Genesis 18:10. Okay, what do we know? Well, we know life begins at conception. It's that simple. I can't prove it physically. I can prove it by divine revelation. So anytime a person takes the life within the mother from conception forward, they're killing a human life. And God records things like that in his book of deeds. Children are a heritage from the Lord. The fruit of the womb is God's reward to us. God gave us the capacity to bear children because it's a wonderful, wonderful experience. Oh, I know you got your ups and downs, hard days, tough days when you have to fight with a child because it wants to play instead of sit. That happens, okay? That happens. They're children, right? Well, all in all, it is so wonderful that we can't even describe it. Looking at your son or your daughter who's made in your image, it's mind-blowing. Having someone that you caused to come into the world, it's a mind-blowing experience. God gave us the capacity to have this because he loves us and because these children are such great people. And then so many people, they cut them up. They put them in dumpsters. And they dump them in the garbage dump. A lot of people, nowadays, a lot of weird people in the world. You rape a 2-year-old child. How do you rape a 2-year-old child? How is that even possible? I don't understand that stuff. Why would somebody want to do that? I don't understand that stuff. Our nation's got some serious issues to deal with. The moral code has gone down so far. There's so many things wrong that are called right. And so many things right, like Kamala Harris said, that is called wrong. Fighting for the right of a child is an immoral act. Who could have trained that up in their wildest imagination? And these are the people that are running and want to continue running our nation. Look, there's nothing I can say it's going to affect elections, okay? We live in Podunk, Tennessee. What is there? 150 of us here today? 50 are children that don't even vote, 100 people. Anything I say is going to have an effect on any kind of election. I don't deal with politics. I hate politics. I really, really hate politics. I'm not a Democrat. I'm not a Republican. I don't like it. I have to vote for one or the other sometimes because I think this guy might be better than that guy. But believe me, it's the lesser of two evils, okay? I don't push politics. I do push our country, though. I do want our country to survive. I want our nation to thrive. I want our community to do good. I want God to love us, to take care of us. And yes, I'm selfish. I want this family to be protected, regardless of what takes place all over the country. I want this family to be protected. So that our children will not have to suffer. I can't bear that. I can't bear that. Sometimes it keeps me awake all night. Just like last night, I couldn't sleep all night. Got it in my head, and I couldn't shake it loose. I'm terrified by what our children are growing up in. It's a completely different world than you and I grew up in. Different attitudes, different moral codes. Everything's different. And they may not see the severity of some of these acts like we can, because they were raised in it. It's like a frog in water. You know, he raises the temperature and he boils or something. And that's the way children might do. Listen what's said. Think. Doesn't matter who says it. The President of the United States, hey, he puts his britches on one leg at a time too. Listen. Think. Are they right? Are they wrong? Are they telling the truth? Are they telling the falsehood? What's their game? And then do what you know to be the right thing to do. And tell your children what's the right thing to do. Because the times are going to get much more turbulent. The baby boomer generation wasn't a real great generation. At least not like the one that preceded them. Been kind of downhill since World War II. But pray. Pray for wisdom. Pray for the salvation of our country. Pray. If you're not a Christian, if you want to become one, you need to believe, repent, and be immersed in water as the children of God. Sometimes, we get sidetracked. I don't know how many times I've been sidetracked in my life. It's so easy to do. Sometimes we get sidetracked. We forget what's really important. And maybe we're not thinking the way we ought to think. If you're here today, if you need God's forgiveness, if we can help you, please come while together we stand and